Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Ninsel, host of AZ Illustrated Politics, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national affairs. On tonight's show, we look at what's coming up in our Tucson City Council elections. Plus, another delay for the Rosemont mine, and Senator John McCain suggests that this might be his final term. All that and more coming up next on AZ Illustrated Politics. But first, a look at today's top stories.
A new report from the U.S. Census Bureau shows that more than a quarter of Tucson residents are living below the poverty line. According to the 2012 American Community Survey, about 27% of the Tucson population is below the poverty line. That's an increase over 5 years ago when about 21% of people living in Tucson were officially living in poverty. Even though the numbers showed an increase since 2008, the trend is flattening in Tucson as well as in Arizona and the nation as a whole. Governor Jan Brewer issued an executive order renaming the state's Common Core education standards. The executive order also said the state is acting independently from the federal government. Nearly every state in the union has adopted the Common Core standards, which Arizona will now call Arizona's College and Career Ready Standards. Many Republicans across the country don't like the Common Core standards because they say the standards were forced on the states by the federal government. Arizona adopted the standards in 2010. And Star Wars fans in Phoenix are getting a rare opportunity. The Heard Museum has announced that on October 6th it will show Star Wars translated into Navajo. The Navajo Nation worked with Lucasfilms to translate the movie for a special screening in Window Rock and now Phoenix. That's a look at tonight's headlines.
The U.S. House of Representatives passed a spending bill sure to lead to a budget showdown and possible government shutdown. Then the White House pushed ahead with the first federal limits of carbon emissions for new power plants, despite opposition from the coal industry. Margaret Warner reports on the plight of Egypt's Coptic Christians amid ongoing political turmoil.
Since the 2011 revolution that deposed Hosni Mubarak, especially after Morsi came to power in 2012, Christians came under pressure as never before.
And David Brooks and E.J. Dion on the week's news. And those are just some of the stories we are covering on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Tonight on Arizona Week, Michael Chihak looks at the path to U.S. citizenship.
Both my parents are from other countries, so like third world countries, and there was a war going on in their countries. I decided to become a U.S. citizen because my parents also decided that they wanted to be a U.S. citizen.
That's tonight at 8:30 on PBS 6.
In just 4 weeks, ballots will be headed to the mailboxes of all Tucson voters for this year's city council races. Joining me to talk about the two seats up for grabs, former city councilwoman Carol West, former state lawmaker Frank Antenori, and attorney Jeff Rogers, the former chairman of the Pima County Democratic Party. Thanks to all of you guys for being here. Carol, Democrats have this huge voter registration advantage, but Republicans have found a path to victory in city council races.
Yes.
They've generally gotten a really good turnout on the east side. They've won over some independents in the center of town, and they've counted on low voter turnout on the south and west sides. Do you see that happening again this year?
Well, actually, I think this year is kind of a yawner. Of course, it's vote by mail, all vote by mail except for a few polling places. And I haven't heard a lot of reaction to the election. I think the only seat that is really one to watch is the Ward 3 race with Karen Ulick and Ben Beeler Garcia. But most of the people I talk to just think it will be the status quo. In other words, I'm not sure that the public is that engaged, but there are some issues. They're having quite a time with the transit fares, telling the staff to look for money. That's, to me, kind of fudging on what their responsibility is. You talk to the business community, they don't think the council is business focused. You talk to the neighborhoods, they're disgusted because they think they've been left out of the scene. So it could be an interesting year, but so far I don't think people are getting that excited. Of course, it's September and people are coming back to town. Maybe things will change.
And Frank, you were pretty involved 4 years ago when Steve Kosachik, the Republican, pulled off the underdog victory. Of course, you and Steve have had some rough times since then.
The true Steve has blossomed.
However, you think Republicans have a shot this year?
Yeah, Ben's got a shot, and there's no doubt it's an uphill fight. I mean, the voter registration differential, the fact that it is an all mail-in ballot, and the Democrats, to the credit of the Democratic Party, is really good on doing the turnout side on the mail-in ballot side, and Republicans have to really step up, and Ben's campaign really has to step up to chase those ballots, particularly those Republican and independent ballots, to make every single Republican and every independent that got a ballot to mail them in to counter what will be a Democrat effort to get turned. So it's a fight, but I think Ben's got a shot. Mike, has got a much further long shot, but crazy things happen, and you never know what happens. There could be some sort of effort that gets Mike across on the coattails of Ben, and as this groundswell goes through. But what's really astounding, Carol, brought it up, it's a snoozer. I mean, in elections in the past, we had these big issues, like Rio Nuevo. I haven't even heard Rio Nuevo mentioned in this campaign. We have an issue going on with the 810 out of DM, potentially, that could put that at risk for a BRAC later on down the road in 2015. Nobody's talking about that. I mean, it's like crickets out there for this race.
And I was at a forum this week with the Republican candidates, and even Ben Buehler-Garcia said this is going to be a very vanilla election. It's really vital that people talk to each other and try to get that vote out. Jeff, your thoughts on how this is shaping up?
Well, we do have a very good get out the vote effort in the Democratic Party. We're one of the few places that actually owns a predictive dialer, which has 10 stations which can be programmed. In the daytime, we can program it to target voters over 65. At 5 or 6 o'clock, we can turn it down to certain other voters, age groups. We can target parts of the city. It's a pretty sophisticated operation, and we installed it 8 years ago, and so it's a nice tool to have. But we've also seen a lot of real grassroots effort. We have good walks going out of our headquarters every week already this early. So I'm confident that we can turn out the vote. I think the election really ought to resolve around the stewardship of these three, one who used to be a Republican, but 3 Democrats, and their 4 years on the council. And I'm comfortable to say that they have ushered us through the most difficult economic times in Tucson's history since we became a charter city in 1929. We've never seen anything like what this council had to deal with. And I know Carol saw a lot of issues when she was on the council, yes. but this economic, they call it the Great Recession, but it was darn close to a depression in this city. And so they had to deal with so many issues, fiscal issues. And they not only did that, but they turned this city around. There are, just as a microcosm, there are 150 new business and enterprises in the downtown area that have established within the last 5 years.
How many has the city lost in the last 5 years? Nobody counts that number.
There are 10,000 new jobs in the last 5 years.
How many jobs have lost in the last 5 years? So nobody counts that.
I think we have a net gain.
Well, this is the Democrat-Obama math thing.
The question is, have they done a good job? And I think the voters are going to reward them in turning this city around during the most difficult times we've ever seen as a city. So and add to that the fact that we're going to work very hard to turn them out. And then number 3, they're not going to have the luxury of having a green candidate on the ballot to siphon off 5,000 to 6,000 or 4,000 votes or 4,400 in Karen's case. That's going to make a huge difference.
One thing I would like to mention before we go on is that on October 16th at 7 p.m. at Temple Emmanuel, there is a nonpartisan forum, and all of the candidates for the council have been invited. So if people want to hear them discuss the issues, why, they can come to that.
And it was a wonderful forum 2 years ago. Really, really had a great turnout.
And we'll also be doing candidate forums on this program on October 4th and October 18th. So tune in for those as well. Frank, you came up a little short
in the
a tad referendum drive to try to put a block on Medicaid, and you think some of the efforts of Governor Brewer helped stop that from going through?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the best thing the Democrats got going for them is the Republican Party, which is right now so, let's just say, dysfunctional and divided, it's not even funny. I mean, we're our own worst enemies. In the last 2 election cycles, between Steve Pierce and now Governor Brewer, they have spent more than $1 million going after Republicans and the grassroots and the conservatives of the Republican Party. And if they'd spent that money going after some of Jeff's friends, we may have things a little different, both at the state and congressional level, or put the effort that the governor put into stopping our effort into the redistricting commission effort, maybe things would be different. But it seems we spend more time attacking each other and going after each other, and the governor spent, and her allies spent, almost $400,000 circulating a fake petition, paying people not to work. That's a great economic plan the city might adopt, right? So she was paying people, paid circulators, not to collect signatures so that we couldn't hire them. And we tried hiring. We received money at the end of the game there. We found a company that would collect signatures for $2 a piece for us. He found 4 people when he usually is able to find like 20. And he said to us, he said, hey, they've all been retained by the Restoring Arizona folks and told not to collect signatures for any counter efforts until December of 2014. So they didn't just hire him for our effort. If anybody tries to do a citizens initiative, they've also hired him not to collect signatures if there's a citizens initiative. So they're pulling out all the stops. The healthcare cartel has done everything they can to make sure there's nothing between them and their big gravy train of Obamacare money pouring into the state.
I don't think I've ever heard of a non-compete clause among petition passers. It's a very unusual, step.
Keep in mind, we also were paying petition gatherers to put the Voter Suppression Act that the Republicans enacted in the wee hours of the legislature, and so that sucked up a lot of those people as well. So there's a little bit of truth to that there was an unavailability of signature passers, because we worked it all the way up until the deadline, and we had probably $300,000 to $500,000 invested in this as well. So
had we gotten 10,000 more through our paid circulators, we'd have been over 90,000. We would have been able to at least mount a decent challenge. It would have been tough not having a lot eliminated, but at least we'd have had it turned in and we'd have gone through the drill and gone to the next phase. And it was just disappointing to come up so short. I mean, so many people worked so hard at it, and it was purely a grassroots effort. We only collected like 1,100 or 1,200 signatures through the paid circulator. So, I mean, it was nothing on the paid side. It was all a grassroots effort. And, a lot of kudos to those folks that stood out in front of the Bank One ballpark in the 115-degree heat collecting signatures and on corners all over the state trying to get people, they worked hard. But we fell short. But we're retooling. We're not going away, and we're going to maintain our database and our effort, and we're going to turn it around and make sure that we continue the fight up into the August primary.
And Jeff, what about the Goldwater Institute's lawsuit that attempts to stop this expansion of Medicaid by saying there was not enough votes to carry it across the threshold?
Well, it's going to be a very close call, and I'll read you the language that's at issue here. It doesn't talk about tax increase. It says any act that provides a net increase in state revenues, and then it defines what those acts are. And one of those says the imposition of any new state fee or assessment, or the authorization of any new administratively set fee. But then it goes on to say in another section, which contradicts that, this section does not apply to fees and assessments that are authorized by statute, which would be this, but are not prescribed by a formula, amount, or limit, and are set by a state officer or agency. In this case, the Department of Health Services would set that fee. So, how the court looks at that and says, okay, well, this applies. Well, wait a minute. This seems to say it doesn't apply, and that's not going to be an easy answer. I mean, we have certain rules for statutory interpretation that the court follows and tries to, figure out what was the intent of this, and was the intent of this to limit it and not to keep things like that from passing. So I don't know. I think that probably there's an equal argument either way, and it's going to be a close call what the court does, but it's definitely going to the Supreme Court.
There's a precedent, however. I read in one account that 80 times over the last 5 years, departments have been allowed to come up with assessments to meet their budgets. And so it would seem to me, Jeff, that would work into the legal part of this too, would it not?
Well, here's the argument both ways on that. It happened actually 76 times that the legislature increased the fee or allowed the fee to be increased. But those were fees that already in existence at the time. So that's, if I were the Goldwater Institute, I'd be arguing, look, these were already there, and so they've increased a fee that was already there, and are allowed an agency to increase one that's already there. But on the other hand, the legislature did do that 76 times. So,
Frank, you have hopes for this?
Yeah,
legal argument.
There's an interesting approach they're taking too. They're also arguing the separation of powers. So it's not just the Prop 108 issue. It's also the fact that the governor used executive authority to delegate power to the executive that is normally reserved for the legislature. And that's an argument I think may have a good shot as well. So they've got a couple good arguments.
I don't think so, because it's in the statute passed by the legislature that delegated that power. So the legislature has purely given that control over to an administrative agency.
They have, Jeff, for a standing agency that is not a 90-10 board, that gets revenue from the general fund, which this tax, by the way, is set up to go into the general fund, has never occurred, okay? This was set up specifically, when you talk 90-10 boards and agencies that self-fund like Game and Fish and the Barber Board.
I don't think that argument's going to have too much water.
I think
the better argument to go on
we're getting a little bit into the weeds here, and probably better leave the arguments.
Well, the reality is that the Constitution says you need a 2/3 vote for a tax increase. So when they were coming against me, the governor's people were arguing that I could not refer a tax to the ballot. So they're going to have a hard time explaining why they were saying, when they were fighting me, that they were saying that I couldn't do my referral because it was a tax and it was authorized and prohibited to refer a tax. And now they're going to have to go into court and say that it's not a tax, that it's a fee. So it's back to the Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi definition of a tax and a fee. So it's going to be interesting.
We'll see how it all plays out. Jeff, the question of Rosemont got delayed again. No decision on that by the Forest Service until next spring now. Do you think this is, what's the reasoning behind the delay here?
Well, if they had pushed it through faster, it would have been subject to some old rules that were in effect before. Now it's going to apply to rules that take effect, I think, September the 27th. And so that's going to allow, I believe, a 90-day window during which people can, it's either 60 or 90 days, during which people who have already added comments can now place objections on the record. And so then what will happen is the Forest Service would issue an environmental impact statement probably sometime in November, and then there's 120 days more that has to go on for additional analysis of that. I think it's a good thing. I mean, you've got the county that's opposing this and says the Forest Service has got it wrong. You've got the Environmental Protection Agency saying the same thing, and you've got the Army Corps of Engineers weighing in. And the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA can stop this thing dead in its tracks right now. And so both of them are concerned that the Forest Service hasn't considered negative effects that will happen to both the wildlife, the aquifer and water supplies, and the air. And there's also an ongoing lawsuit against the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality by another group that is suing, saying that they wrongfully issued an air permit to begin with. So, this thing needs to play itself out. Look, what we're seeing is that if the EPA and the county and others are right, this would be irreversible damage to an aquifer and to an ecosystem that can't take it. And so, if during this additional time Rosemont can prove up the fact that they have their I's dotted and T's crossed, and that they're right, it's not going to affect the aquifer and the wildlife and the air in such a negative way, then it goes forward. And so I think this additional amount of time is a wise thing to do.
Carol, what do you think?
I think the additional amount of time is good, and it also allows those who object to the EIS to weigh in on some of the issues. It may also mean that they'll have time to work some of these things out. The federal agencies may be able to work something out. And Rosemont's owners are not so foolish either. They are trying to buy some land for wildlife corridors and that kind of thing. However, one person has pointed out that really, even if that land were left in the private sector, if it were to be developed, Pima County has pretty stringent laws regarding development in open space, so probably wouldn't matter. But at least they're making some efforts that before I don't think they were going to do, and I see that as a good thing.
Frank, what do you think of the delay?
The law is on Rosemont's side. It's not an inevitability issue. Sooner or later, they will get the permit. So the opponents are pulling out all the stops to try to delay. But Rosemont's going to eventually get their permits, and there's going to be a mine down there. And every time I hear about all these tragic things that are going to happen, you drive down I-19, you have one of the largest mining complexes in the state, and right next to it is the pecan groves, where all these trees are growing, and you stop and think, and you say, well, people are complaining about this mine, and the pecan groves consume 3 to 4 times the water. Even if you get the recharge credit from flood irrigation, they're still using twice as much water as the mine. So, you don't see this opposition when you're dealing with the water issue with agriculture. For some reason, it's only the evil mining companies. I guess if you're a big Democrat donor named Walden and you grow trees, you're good to go. But if you're a mining company that digs holes, you're evil. So that's the reality.
These are entirely different ecosystems, Frank. This ecosystem down there where the mines that are off I-19, west of I-19, those are are not sensitive areas, the riparian areas and other areas
that every inch of the
that are
state's a
gyms.
sensitive
Like,
area.
well, no, they're not quite comparable.
And
the areas
out
of
there.
Davidson
I'm
Canyon
very
and all of
familiar.
those areas.
I ride quads in Davidson
Absolutely.
Canyon. Very familiar with it.
And that's a beautiful area that's lush. It's one of the environmental gems of this state.
You can make arguments for almost any section of the state that it's environmentally sensitive and fragile for every argument.
Right, well, we'll see where this goes next spring. Carol, this week, advocates for same-sex marriage began a campaign to try to change attitudes in the state, perhaps ahead of a 2016 ballot initiative to legalize same-sex marriage here in the state of Arizona. You think they can be successful?
I do. I think people's attitudes towards same-sex marriage are changing, and I think that we're going to have younger voters. My kids, for example, say, well, what's the big deal? You know, younger people don't see this as an issue at all. And the proof in the pudding, of course, will be getting them to vote. They're often the ones that stay home, while older people who pollsters say tend to be more for the traditional marriage, they tend not to want to be in favor of this. But I think having an education campaign is a very good idea. And also, I think now almost everybody knows someone who is gay. And in fact, I know several gay couples personally that are in my circle of friends. And they went to California and were married. And I think there are a lot of reasons. For example, if you're ill in the hospital and your spouse, in this case, your wife or husband, can't be the first person notified of your condition and that kind of thing, I see that as really onerous. Plus, the whole tax structure and so on. And I think education might help.
And Frank, during your congressional campaign, you said there should be a federal amendment.
That's only because
banning same-sex marriage.
the Supreme Court's overturned in the states, and the states like Arizona put it on the ballot and it changed our constitution. You saw it done out in California, and the federal courts are running roughshod over states' rights. So it's evident we may need a federal approach to this. The reality is, government needs to get out of the marriage business. That would solve all these problems. That would solve the marriage penalty that the tax system imposes. We can do, I have no problem granting my wife some kind of power of attorney or whatever. We could work out all that, get the government. I think we've evolved as a society and as a country. Back in the 1700s, maybe promoting marriage was good for growing the country and the population, but I think we're beyond that now. Government needs to get out of it. It's a private decision. It's in the bedroom. What goes on in the bedroom stays in the bedroom. You want to do whatever you want to do in the bedroom, knock your socks off. But the reason the gay rights advocates are making such a big issue out of this is because of the benefits, the tax exemptions, and the status that marriage invokes in our society now, because it's endorsed by government. So if you get government out of the equation, I think the whole argument goes away.
Jeff, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I never heard Frank make that argument. I've heard a lot of other people suggest that, well, everybody should have a civil union, and if you have a marriage, that's up to you and your church and your faith. And that once you have the civil union, then those government benefits attached to it and the rights and responsibilities Carol spoke of. So that's maybe not such a bad idea, and perhaps a little common ground we could find.
Well, I just say get rid of even the community, or what would you call it, the
civil union.
Civil union thing, nothing.
But
No government endorsement whatsoever.
Here's the reality of the situation.
You have custody issues and things like that.
Yeah,
you can set that up legally. You don't need marriage to set up custody issues. I can name heirs and dependents without and transfer of my kids and my assets to whoever I want right now.
But the reality of it is that Grant Wood said it pretty well and kind of echoed what Carol said here. He said, and that's a former Republican Attorney General, he says, well, it just sort of depends upon how many old people die between now and 2014, because this really is 2016. It's a no-brainer for people under 30, under 40, even if I mean, it's really an age and demographic issue here, and most states outside of maybe Alabama and Mississippi are going to eventually get to where California and where we are and where I think we'll be. And that's why it needed to be off the ballot in 2014. That was a bad idea. You have a low voter turnout overall, and you have a low young people voter turnout. In 2016, you have the young people coming out to vote for president, and you increase the kind of the demographics of the voting populace, and they'll have a much better chance. Also, it's 2 more years of, as Carol said, of, we all have friends, family members, co-workers, people we know that they're gay or lesbian, and it's just, times are changing and people are realizing that, and I think a really good indicator of it is the new Pope and what he came out with in the last few weeks.
I want to get to...
Well, he said that they'll be judged by God. So I'm all for that standard.
So I want to get to the John McCain this week saying this might be his last term in the U.S. Senate. He said that he was feeling like he wanted to move on before he became one of those old guys who should have moved on long ago.
and I laughed when you said that, because I think his old guy should have moved on long ago timetable was like 6 years ago. So he's become quite a problem for the Republican Party. He's instigated a lot of efforts that undermine the party platform and demoralized our base. And because of that, it helps guys like Jeff and his allies, because Republicans say, hey, I don't want to deal with this no more. I don't want to vote for guys like John McCain, and I don't believe in what he's doing, whether it's the amnesty issue or all the other things he's gone on with regard to his sort of, I don't know, maverick approach, I guess you can call it, and it's turned a lot of Republicans off. And we've been trying to get those Republicans to come back to the party and get John McCain to leave it so that we can start moving forward with our vision.
He said this week that he didn't think it was rational what the House was doing in terms of defunding Obamacare. Your thoughts on that whole government shutdown, brinksmanship that's taking place right now?
Even Democratic congressmen and senators have recognized that there's a huge problem with Obamacare. You just had 2 Democrat congressmen today vote actually to defund, which was a breaking of the ice. One was Mike McIntyre.
You also had one Republican who voted the other way with the Democrats.
Well, and he'll have to discuss that with his constituents as well. But I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't agree that there are huge problems with this. And delaying it for a year may be probably the compromise that everybody can agree to. Let's just push all the implementation back a year and try to come up with a compromise workaround or a different approach. But it's killing jobs. It's pushing people from full-time to part-time. It's kicking spouses off of health care plans for companies for the other spouse. I mean, it's got a lot of problems.
And Carol, we're down to less than 2 minutes, but your thoughts on this whole government shutdown threat?
Well, I think it's hypocritical. You can't, on one hand, vote to pay bills that the government owes, and then on the other hand, have this threat hanging over us. And I think we should see how the implementation is going to work. In fact, I've talked with a number of organizations here in town who are waiting for October 1st so they can look into this exchange. As a matter of fact, 2 of my children have no health insurance and will be looking at this, and were telling me that they were looking forward to getting some insurance. The big problem with the Republicans' plan that was in the paper is that 56 million people need insurance, and their plan, which would be put in a private savings account, does nothing to help these people. And I and a lot of other people feel it's time for us to help these people rather than having that burden on our insurance costs personally.
25 seconds left here, Jeff.
Well, we've never seen anything in the history of the United States where one party has held our economy and government hostage. And that's what the Republicans are doing. They're engaging in hostage taking. And this is a dangerous, precipitous time in this economic recovery. We need to pass the debt limit and move on.
Okay, and Frank, I'm sure you have something to say, but we're going to have to wait till next week. We're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you guys for coming in, and we will see you all, or we will be right back with some closing thoughts. That's our show for today, but you can learn more about politics by visiting azpm.org or by following us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching another edition of AZ Illustrated Politics.